And like, I thought for sure, I was certain I was going to die. This was before I moved my feet. So we bought this farm from a family. So they had a similar family grow up here. And when we came out to look at it, he said that shortly after buying this property, my dad was killed in a tragic accident. 10 days after buying this place, I'm laying in the street and I'm like, dude, this is like the story of this farm, you know, like you get a dream, you go close on this thing, and then you die in a tragic accident.
Welcome to the Iron Deep podcast. I'm Mike Stansberry, and today I've got a special guest, a good friend, Mike Neubauer. Tell the audience a little bit about you. Where do you live? How many kids you got? A lot. Spoil that. And what's life look like for you right now?
So Mike Neubauer, we live in Crown Point. So my beautiful wife, Morgan, and I, we got 6 kids right now. We got one on the way coming in July. A little bit crazy around here, but we have a lot of fun. We live on 40 acres. We got a couple ATVs, barn cats, chickens, a couple geese, added a new puppy to the mix. So just kind of living life. And then as far as business goes, real estate investor and newly the title as CEO of Grand Vision Capital Group. So kind of the next step in our real estate venture. But that's pretty much us right now, man. We're living life here and taking it one day at a time.
Yeah. So when we first met, I think you had one child in Guatemala, maybe one, I think. And I had 4 at the time. This was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And you've morphed into now this will be 7 coming.
This
right?
will be number 7. Yeah.
Number 7. And so you've adopted 3 children. Tell the audience a little bit about how that whole thing transpired.
Yeah. So, I mean, my wife and I, so initially, like everybody, like, hey, we're going to have this number of kids, you know, we thought it'd be 2. But then like, as life kind of continued on, we just kind of felt this yearning in our heart, both of us really, to adopt. So Morgan's mom was adopted. My grandpa was adopted. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if somebody didn't give them an opportunity, there would be no Morgan and me and no married couple, between the 2 of us. So we kind of always felt that it was kind of our, I don't know, some reason we felt kind of responsibility to do it. We felt God was saying like, hey, you know, I gave you a good life. It's time to pass that on. So we wanted to do it. But it was scary. It was expensive. So then I think we met you. We were part of Life in Air, and Life in Air kind of makes you do some crazy things. So basically just sat down. We're like, what's the first step if we were just going to do this thing? And it was like, well, just fill out an application. It was like $50, fill out an application. And yeah, man, they called the next day. You're doing application, home study. Before you know it, it's like, dude, we got 3 new kids in the house and life is nuts.
So tell me a little bit more about those moments. So that's specifically one of them where God came in and just totally wrecked maybe a past mindset that you had, or just wrecked kind of, you know, God has this way of like taking us through these valleys and just upending things. And we just got to keep walking through it to reach the other side. But tell me about those moments for the Neubauers.
Oh man, related right to the adoption or to everything?
Well, let's go to the adoption first, and then let's transition into what happened to you, you know, fairly recently.
Yeah. So the adoption, you know, we started with real estate, and the dream was kind of always, you know, to do well, not always, but in that moment, do real estate, use real estate to make money, you know, and we thought we were on the right path. I thought we were living the dream. And I mean, everything was fine, but then you find God like kind of saying like, hey, you know, I let you have this dream because I got more coming for you. And I think that's probably what it was. Is like, man, we felt like we are having success. And it was then God was like, now it's time to put that success to use to, you know, what I need you to do in the world. And yeah, I don't know what it was. You know, we kind of both, I get goosebumps just talking about it right now, man. But my wife and I both kind of felt it. You know, it's like one of those things, you know, how often your wife and you both have the exact same, you know, feeling and like, hey, I'd like to do this crazy life-changing thing. And she's like, yeah, me too. You know, I mean, that just doesn't happen. So when we both kind of felt God pulling us in that direction, we said, hey, let's just take the leap. You know, I mean, like anything else, you got God on your side. It's going to be all right. And not say, I mean, we're not like, you know, some crazy take the leap people, but we've done it enough now in life to realize that when you get that nudge, your life looks a lot better when you just follow it and do it.
Okay, so you followed it, you did it with specifically with the adoptions, and then a few years back, you had this opportunity to move to more of a rural type lifestyle, to a farm, and that's going to lead us into kind of what happened to you. So kind of paint us a picture there about the farm, and then let's talk about the accident, and let's talk about what God did there.
Yeah. So with real estate, we move quite a bit. So like every 2 years we sell our house, take our capital gains tax free, go find another house. But now we're at, 6 kids, life's getting a little crazy. That kind of move stuff wasn't really working as well anymore. So we switched it over, and we thought we had found a good house. It was, like a half acre, kind of plenty of room, it fit our family well. But within like a couple months, it's like, man, we just don't feel like this just isn't home. This just doesn't feel right. So Morgan was saying, maybe like an acre, 2 acres, give us a little more space, let the kids go play, have some fun. And then we stumbled across this property that expired on the MLS, and it was 40 acres. And like typical for us is kind of like a fallen down house, needed a ton of work. And I'm like, dude, that's the one. Like, and she's like looking like, that is not what I meant at all. And I'm like, that is perfect. So we put it under contract in January, actually. And then we closed, I think it was June 10th. So like 6 months it was under contract. They had some family stuff going on. We weren't quite ready, so we put in a contract, kind of just worked through it. But yeah, we went from at the moment, a dream of kind of 1 to 2 acres, and we found ourselves, under contract on a 40-acre farm, built in 1894, kind of unkept for years, overgrown, falling apart, and we knew that was the dream. We were ready to roll.
And then at this time too, you're ready to roll. And again, I love the fact that you look at this old dilapidated house, and and I know exactly, I can picture it in my mind, how run down it was. Also, while you're this real estate investor, the other part that we didn't go over is that you have another whole other occupation that you're a full-time, you're a firefighter paramedic.
Correct. Yep.
And then you're also doing the real estate thing, and they're both side hustles or whatever, but you're both engaged in both activities, correct? What did that look like? Having both those, being an employee, your duties as a firefighter, paramedic, and then being a full-time real estate investor. How did you juggle that?
Yeah. So, I mean, being a fireman, it's 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So you always have 2 days. Like every time you go to work, you're gone for 24 hours, but then every time you come home, you basically have a weekend. So over time, we kind of built. In the beginning, it was tough because there's just not enough money in real estate. You're doing it all, just try to pay the bills. But as we kind of built our portfolio and started having a little bit more money, then it was on my off days, take care of what you got to take care of. But in general, we kind of built it in a way that I could take care of some stuff just via my phone. If I'm at the firehouse on my off days, take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. And we kind of always had the real estate. We didn't pull money from it. We just rolled it over, and it was kind of always like the firehouse paid the bills. And one day this real estate, when I leave Firehouse, would be awesome to have there and, pay the bills plus more. So that's kind of how we always ran it. It's more of like a hobby that paid really well.
Now, this day happens, you're doing work to the farm, you're getting everything ready. Take us through the day. Do you remember what was the date? And then just kind of walk us through what happened to you that day that we're anticipating here.
So June 22nd, 2021. I just worked at the firehouse the day before. So solid shift at the firehouse, nothing too crazy. Came home, but this was moving day. So we had moved a few boxes and stuff, but this was final moving day. So we're moving stuff back and forth from our old house to the farm now, just kind of stacking things up. And then we had the last thing, we had a few boxes, and then I had to get the tractor from the old house. We had our tractor at the old house, had to move it over to the farm, put it on the trailer and so on. And it's kind of crazy. Obviously, we'll get to the real part. But we had left and we were driving over. I can't remember what I forgot, but I forgot something. And I told Morgan, oh man, we forgot. I got to turn around and go back. And this is like a 40 minute drive back and forth. So I turn around, I come back, head back over to the house, get to the house. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, the keys for the tractor were with all the other keys. They're back at the farm too. I forgot the keys. So we go back, get the keys, come back. Now we get the tractor. My dad's got a bigger pickup truck. So he's there with the trailer waiting for us. So we're going, loading things up, get the tractor loaded up on the trailer, get it up there. And you can't tell the trailer's light without a tractor on it, but you get the tractor on it and then we got a flat tire. I'm like, come on, man. Like we just cannot win today, So we're like kind of babying this down. Everything's gone from the house. There's no air compressor. There's no anything left. It's a vacant house. So we're kind of babying this thing down the road. And I see a guy with his garage door open, with like a plumbing truck. I'm like, that dude's got an air compressor for sure. So I walk up there, he fills up our tire. It's like, man, finally. So we're ready to roll. We're cruising down the street. And my dad said, "Hey, your sister just had a bunch of landscaping done. They left a big spoil pile of dirt." He's like, "Man, if we stop there with this tractor, it'll take 2 minutes. Otherwise, we're going to hand dig it and stuff. It'll take all day. 2 minutes, we'd have that done." And I'm like, "That's fine. It won't take long. Let's go ahead and do that." So we kind of detour, go to her house. We pull up in the side of the road, and yeah, man, that's when getting the tractor off, and that's when life changed forever.
So life changed for you. Briefly tell us a little bit about the accident and a little bit about the miracles that happened immediately, and then kind of and what happened afterward.
Yeah, man. So I'll share a story. Feel free to jump in with any questions or whatever. But I'll kind of share the story. So we're sitting there, it's my dad and I, getting a tractor off. So kind of doing what typical dad and son be doing, telling some jokes, talking, getting the straps undone, putting the ramps up and stuff. And I just stepped up. It's a big old diesel tractor. So I just stepped up on the trailer, and I was going to start it. And I just reached over, like I always do. And I went to turn the key, just start it to warm it up before we got it off. But what had happened was, when you put it on the trailer, you don't leave it in neutral, put it in gear so that it can't roll around on the trailer. So I didn't even think twice. I'm talking with my dad, reach over, this thing's in gear. The guy we had bought it from had tripped the safeties. So normally it wouldn't start in gear, but he had bypassed those safeties and bypassed the seat safety. So like normally, you have to be sitting on the seat to start it. And I wasn't paying attention. The safeties were bypassed, like the perfect storm, man. So I reached over, started it. And as soon as I turned that key, man, that engine turned and that thing was off to the races. It grabbed my leg. It felt like slow motion, standing there, because I knew as soon as it grabbed my leg, it was like, this is it. There's no fighting it. So it happened in a split second, but it felt like slow motion. I screamed, bloody murder. My dad, dropped everything, comes running. But by that time, man, it pulled me under. It ran across my pelvis, right across my hips, the back tire. So crushed my hips. I'm laying on the trailer, screaming. My dad comes over, pulls me off onto the ground. So then I'm laying there in the street. I know that I can just tell my pelvis is crushed. I look at my hand, this hand, which is, as you can tell, still there, but at the time was not there. So I look, just two nubs, sticking out, two bones sticking out the end of my hand. My hand was just kind of hanging by what I thought was skin, but luckily a couple nerves, arteries, and veins are still attached as well. But my hand was just kind of flopping there. And that was it, man. So my dad's yelling, that we're on a street. So cars are driving around. I'm laying in the middle of the street and cars are driving past my head as I'm laying there. My dad's trying to get his cell phone out. Yeah, dude, it was crazy. And I tell, we'll see where this conversation goes. But as I was laying there, I just remember, like I said, I was a firefighter paramedic. So like, man, I knew, like, I've been on the other side, and I've picked these people up, and you tell the family, hey, we're going to do the best we can. But in the back of your head, this is too much. There's just no way that, traumatic injuries are, once you're bleeding inside, you got to be like 10 minutes to a hospital and you got to be doing surgery. And I knew that I was 15 minutes from a regular hospital, and I was a good hour and a half from, by air to any hospital that had any ability to actually save my life. But yeah, so I was laying there, man, and I looked down and I just remember thinking, like, my biggest thing was, man, dude, I do not want to be paralyzed. Like, I just, for whatever reason, that was my thought. And I looked at my feet, and same thing. I've done this as a paramedic a million times. I think in my whole career, one time I asked somebody to wiggle their toes and they didn't wiggle and they thought they were. Every other time it's fine. And I'm like, man, if that's it, I don't know if I have the will to fight through this. And I looked down and I thought, all right, let's go. And I wiggled my toes and I saw both feet move, because I knew there's, the bones were crushed, and I saw both feet move. And as soon as I saw them move, I was like, all right, dude, it's go time. I was yelling at my dad on the phone. He's on the phone, 911. I'm like, tell him to get a helicopter in the air. And I could tell, in his voice that they're saying, we can't do that. And I'm like, tell him, put it on the radio, tell the chief, tell anybody, get a helicopter. Because I know, like, now I'm running through in my head, like, all right, now I know how this works. If there's any chance of living, the time is of the essence. So I just, I kind of went into like go mode and, started calling the shots, yelling at people and, doing whatever I could to fight through this.
So what's interesting is that your whole life as a paramedic firefighter prepared you for this moment. And it was the toes, right? You watch those and you're like, okay, I don't need to panic. I need to go through my protocols. And that's what you did.
Yeah.
And then, okay, how long did it take the helicopter to get there?
Yeah, so the fire department comes down, so the ambulance gets there first. And the two guys walk up. I see the engine coming down the street. The two guys run up, but the problem is everybody sees my hand. So my hand is flopping there. So that's like super distracting. Everybody's going to the hand. And I'm yelling at the paramedics. I'm like, my pelvis is crushed. Forget that hand. I was like, who cares about my hand? So I'm like walking them through because they can't see. I have clothes on, so to them, they can't see the injuries that are truly there. So they get me on, man, they roll me. And whew, that was like the pain of my life, put me on a backboard. And then they're lifting me up, put me in the back of the ambulance. And same thing, like I know the medications they have. I'm screaming for medications and they're like asking what dose. And I'm like, dude, screw the dose. Give me all of it. Write whatever you want for the dose, but give me everything. They're talking about my hand, how they're going to bandage it. And I'm like, forget that hand. Get me to the hospital. So they drove me to the local hospital. I don't know who ended up calling the helicopter, but at some point the helicopter is already in the air. So I was at the hospital and I was maybe there. I don't know exact time because there's a lot going on, but only about 10, 15 minutes. And the helicopter's landing, the crew was coming in. And then we're off in the air off to Chicago.
Okay. So the way that I remember a part of the story is that the doctor that was going to operate you had gotten the information about your injuries and was expecting you to be a DOA. Is that true, or kind of what were the details there?
I don't know all those details. My wife would know better because she was the one kind of communicating. I do know that as we were going away, the flight medic and flight nurse, told my wife, took her phone number down, and they said, we're going to let you know either way. And she was like, what do you mean either way? And they're like, we'll call you when we get there. So she was, freaking out. They rode with my dad. So they're driving to Chicago. I say Chicago, it's Loyola. It's right outside Chicago. And I don't know the details, but yeah, when I landed, on the trauma team is there and stuff. And Morgan would know the details better. But yeah, they said that, most people don't make that flight. Most people aren't coming in, talking, and usually the team's waiting, but it's too late. It's just too far. Like your heart's pumping, you're bleeding. It's just too much. Your body, it just comes down to time. Your body just can't sustain for that long before you're finally getting some, real treatment there. So
I remember one of our mutual friends, Steve Cook, had put out kind of an APB, and we're all praying for you. We're your friends, people in Guatemala, people that are around the country just had praying. Let's pray for Mike Neubauer. I knew a little bit of the details. A lot of people didn't. But you had a ton of people, I think, at these very moments in prayer, talking to God, and just all out, hey, spiritual, we're going to war for Mike Neubauer. When you get to the surgery gets done, you get out of surgery. Tell us about what the surgeon saw, what happened once you got there, the surgery and afterward. Tell us about those details and the odds. If you can speak to really what are the odds that these things happen the way they happen?
Well, I don't think the odds are good to get run over by a tractor. I feel like that's like lottery winning odds. So I wish I would have went the other way.
In reverse, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell that. I'll share something that kind of just popped in my head. I'll just go with what popped in my head. But
Sure.
One piece of the story too. So before I'm laying in the street, and like I thought for sure, I was certain I was going to die. This was before I moved my feet. I'm laying there, and I'll share the story. So we bought this farm from a family. So they had a similar family grow up here. And when we came out to look at it, they wanted more money. And their one brother who had cancer at the time, he said that he was talking with his brothers, and he said there hasn't been joy like that on this farm forever. He said, since we were kids running around, we haven't seen that kind of joy, because our kids, just running, playing, it's wintertime, they're throwing snowballs. So we end up, moving forward and buying this house. And we talked with the brothers, and they said, this was our dream. My mom and dad had this dream. So, we're like, oh, it's awesome. This is Morgan and I's dream. And he goes, shortly after buying this property, my dad was killed in a tragic accident. He said my dad never got to live that dream. He passed away, so my mom was left to raise all of us kids by herself on this farm. So, dude, we're 10 days after buying this place. I'm laying in the street and I'm like, dude, how does that happen? Like, this is like the story of this farm, like you get a dream, you go close on this thing, and then you die in a tragic accident. So like laying there, I was like, man, that is just unbelievable. I can't believe that's the way I'm going out, and like that's the story of this place. So that was like right before I moved my feet. So like I had that moment, I thought, and then it was like basically, this is it. Let's see if these feet move. And if they do, it's go time. And if not, man, that's the story of this farm. So that's what happened. But yeah, once those feet moved and I was calling the shots, I was calling the shots with like 99.9% certainty I'm pulling through this. I was like calling the shots because I was like, nobody's going to screw this up. Like I'm not supposed to live because God wants me to live, and somebody's going to make a mistake and mess this up. So, that's when it was like, I was very certain, that's why I was, calling shots, yelling at the medics. When I was in the hospital, my wife showed up. My dad called my wife. She comes rushing in. And she was pretty under control, but I was like, do not cry. I'm going to be fine. I need you to stay strong, like keep a clear brain. We got to get through this, and the helicopter was coming. And so our hospital is called Franciscan, and their main hospital is Indianapolis. And we're kind of in the middle of Chicago and Indianapolis, a little bit closer to Chicago. But I grew up as a firefighter going to Chicago, paramedic. Any tragedies, you go to Chicago. So I knew those hospitals. I knew the people there as far as just their skill level. And so they said, we're taking you to Indianapolis. And I was like, absolutely not. You are not taking me to Indianapolis. And they're like, well, that's our hospital. And I was like, dude, my hand might be ripped off. I might not be able to sign the paperwork, but you are not taking me to Indianapolis. I was like, I refuse whatever you want. You're taking me to Chicago. And they're like, all right. So then they ended up I said, I don't care what hospital in Chicago, but I'm going to Chicago. So we end up going to Loyola. So like, I felt like this whole time, like these things are going right, like these little things that I just didn't feel right about. And like, when I said no, they were like, all right, we'll make the change, so things were going in my direction, of what I felt. So when I got to the hospital, they started doing, I don't even remember what tests, but CAT scans, ultrasounds, all of that. And then my family started showing up. There was firemen that were there. I walk in roll into the hospital, I'm laying in the ER, and Morgan had called some of my firefighter friends. They're standing there waiting. I was like, I was surrounded, by people presently, by prayer, everything. But as we started going and getting these tests back, they said, like, this is amazing. They said, but all these bones and these shards, the only organ that is punctured and bleeding is the bladder. And they said the bladder is not cause any sepsis. They said it's very safe organ. And they said it's very minimal bleeding. It's not something, that like it ruptures and bleeds out and kills you. So they said, we got to stabilize this. They stabilized my hand. They put my hand, dude, like crazy, just set it back on top kind of, and like bandaged it. But like, as we're going through the ER and getting these tests back, and, more and more specialists are coming in now, like we're starting to get the piece of the puzzle. And like, now you can see hope in their eyes. You can see, like, as the doctor's reading the results, like, man, you're not going to believe this, but the only organ is the bladder. They're looking at my hand and they're like, you're not going to believe this. I talked to my hand surgeon afterwards, and she's like, I couldn't believe it. They sent me the image. And then I got a message that said the hand still has sensation and blood flow. And she's like, I dropped everything and I'm coming. And so it's just like story after story of like, no way we're saving this hand. And then an update is like, dude, your hand has blood flow and the nerves are still intact here. Your whole insides are, crushed, but it's only your bladder. So you're going to be fine. So that's kind of like, once we got to Loyola, that's how the story started going.
Okay. So you're getting all this good news, report after report after report from the doctors, from the specialists. But what are the odds that you get eaten up by a tractor like this, and the only organ that gets slight damage is the bladder? With that type of trauma and what you experienced and what you have seen as a paramedic, you've seen things that the normal civilian doesn't see. You've seen accidents, you've seen death, you've seen bad injury. And what are the odds that this tractor only does that type of damage?
Yeah, dude, the odds are, almost non-existent. Two things. So the odds are unlikely, initially, that I'm going to live until we start getting some feedback that, this is better than we were hoping on the inside. But then too, the odds, I mean, it ran right across my pelvis, so the base of my spine. So the odds of overcoming it living and the odds of being able to ever walk again, I mean, it's like double unlikely to ever overcome this, because that's what you start thinking about is, all right, so now I'm going to live, but like, I'm going to be totally disabled by this, like what does life look like totally disabled? Yesterday I'm going on 911 calls, going on these accidents myself, pulling people out of a car, going on ambulance calls, carrying them up and down stairs, and all of a sudden, like, I'm that guy, I'm the guy that can't do anything on my own. I'm the guy that, is totally disabled. So that's kind of like the mindset that started to be super scary of, the excitement to live, but the fear of what does living look like now?
Wow. The doctors perform the surgeries. The surgeries go pretty successful. Within a week or two, now you have kind of this, I guess, a plan moving forward, or maybe a week to 2 weeks after it. If you were to look back on the event and where you were at 2 weeks, where did you think you were? What did you think the long-term effects were going to be kind of a week or 2 weeks afterward?
Yeah, so talking to the surgeon, the hand was going to be the biggest issue. So there's a lot of nerve damage to the hand, and the surgeon said, we did the best we could, but you did have blood flow, but you had a lot of loss of blood flow for a long time. The nerves are damaged. She said it's almost impossible to tell the severity of damage. It's kind of just a wait and see game. So the hand was very questionable, and I had a ton of like nerve pain and nerve sensation. My hand felt like it was on fire. Sometimes it felt like there's like water dripping on my hand, just super weird stuff. So like that, I had no idea. I was happy that it was going to be there, but had no idea. And then for my pelvis, I talked to the surgeon, and I mean, he was a young guy. He was like my age. And he was like, dude, I think you're going to pull through this. And he's like, I'm not telling you it's not going to be painful. I'm not telling you it's going to be tough. It's like my biggest question. I love skiing. So like out in Colorado and stuff, I was like, you think I'll be able to ski again? And that's when he was like, he's like, let me say this. I've seen people do crazier stuff than skiing after an injury. He's like, so I'm not saying it's impossible, but you can't hold me to it that you're going to be skiing again. So that was kind of like my gauge. Like, I'll be able to live a normal life, but will I be able to do things I always did? I don't know. So that was kind of the 2 week mark. That's kind of where we were at. But I was also still like, I was bedridden, for a while. So within this 2 weeks, like, life is still crazy, dude. Like, I can't get up, go to the bathroom. I can't do anything. My hand is, in terrible pain. So, I mean, that's a super, it's still pretty fresh as far as the recovery, but at least like my mind was starting to realize, hey, we just got to get through this. This is temporary.
What was your faith like back then?
Yeah. So my faith was strong, I'll say. I knew it was something, but I didn't know what. I feel so like a lot of people kept saying, I mean, you see this a lot, everybody kept saying God had big plans for you, and the devil tried to stop it. The devil did this accident, he's trying to stop big plans. So, God has big plans because you pulled through. And like, honestly, that never felt right. I'm not saying that's wrong for everybody, but in my heart, I was just like, that wasn't like, there was never a moment laying there in fear. Even when I thought I was going to die, I was at peace. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, dude, this is unbelievable, but I mean, I wasn't like, I was at peace. I knew God was there. Once I moved my feet, I was like, dude, for sure, we're getting through this now. It's go time, So like, I knew that God was there the whole time, and I never felt like that this was a tragedy, caused by the devil. So in those moments, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what it looked like. I did agree that God had big plans. I just didn't know what those big plans were. But now I've kind of come to start to think about, this is the way I look at it now that I've had time to process almost 2 years later, is people kept saying like, the devil tried to stop you because God had big plans for your life. And now anybody that would tell me that, I would tell them, you're right, God had big plans, but this was a blessing. This was not a tragedy. The devil did not do this to stop God. God did this. And I'm not saying necessarily the accident. I'm not saying, I don't know exactly details of how it works. Let it happen, did it himself. I have no idea. But God did this because the devil was already winning. I feel like God had big plans, and he saw me getting complacent. He saw me kind of taking easy street, and he was like, we got to get your attention. We have big plans, and you're on the slow path to accomplishing these plans. We got to make something happen here. And Morgan had been telling me for years, she's like, I got a feeling you got to get out of the firehouse. There's something about, She's like, I
Mm.
just don't feel like you're supposed to be there. And I thought it was like a worrying wife, you know, I'm like, it's not like you see on TV. We're not running into fires and jumping out of windows, you know, like, and she's like, that's not what it is. She's like, I've seen you there. I know what it is. She's like, I'm just saying that it's something you got to get out of the firehouse. And I was always like that. I'm not gonna, she's like, I'm telling you. And so, yeah, man, I mean, now I look back and realize I feel that's why I tell Morgan, I'm like, dude, God chose Team Morgan. You know, you must have had a conversation and he was like, all right, I'm joining your team. Let's get him out of the firehouse.
You know, we've been friends for a while, and this takes me back. This popped in the back of my head that we had talked before the accident about the firehouse a little bit, and you know, we have this saying in our family, and I think you may be ascribed to it too. You know, you are the top 5 people that you hang out with the most, and not saying that the firehouse guys are bad, but or any of that, but you knew that there was some growth that could only happen if you had to get out of that. You know, you had to move through. You have to move through life, and sometimes you have to say goodbye to a career that you loved. I'm sure you loved helping people, and you loved the guys at the firehouse. I remember again seeing on social media and just the outpouring of love from the paramedic and the fire community in your local community. But sometimes, you know, we're just a bunch of stubborn men, right? That need to listen to our wives a little bit more. And if that doesn't work, then God has some other plan.
I tell people that, man. They're like, hey, man, I feel like I should be doing this. I'm like, I'm gonna give you some advice. I would definitely do it if that's what you feel like, because you're doing it one way or another. And the other way is not always very pleasant.
Right. So, what takeaway, again, for you guys listening out there, listen to your wives. God gave you a wife for a reason. So Mike, here we are 2 years later. Spoiler alert, you're skiing, right?
Yeah. This winter, first time I went skiing. Yeah. The kids thought I was nuts, man, because the kids ski with me. And we're going down a hill, and it was kind of private. You know, there wasn't really anybody out there. It's kind of on the backside. But man, I just stopped and I was just like crying. And I was like, thank you, God. My kids are like, Dad, you're being weird, dude. People are looking at you. I was like, you don't get it. Like, this is it. Like, we made it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful.
That was this winter, man. First time. So call that doctor. I go see him in a couple weeks for my 2-year follow-up. I let him know, hey, dude, next guy that asks if he'll be able to ski, you tell him, yeah, for sure.
What a beautiful testimony that you have going through this event and looking at it and having that filter of, hey, you know what? God did this and it was a blessing. Mike, not a lot of people look at tragedy that way. And I really appreciate you articulating that to our audience, because, you know, somebody may be listening and going through a tough time in life. You know, they may be going through a physical or financial or spiritual. And what you just did today is you articulated that, you know, God has plans for people while they're going through the valley. And if they just keep walking through it, and sometimes it is hell to walk through a valley, but you just got to keep walking, and God will get you through it. Any final thoughts from you about anything else that you would articulate to somebody, the lessons that you've learned in the last couple of years of walking through this with you and your family and with all the responsibilities that you have?
Yeah, I mean, kind of touch on what you just said, a couple of things. I think, our friend Steve Kavanaugh, he gave me the greatest compliment ever. He's like, I don't know anybody that listens to that nudge of God as well as you do. And I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say I think a lot of people, I know that God speaks to everybody the same way. You know, everybody feels that nudge. And I feel like a lot of times that nudge pushes us in a very uncomfortable, you know, direction, and we say no to it. So, I mean, I think that would probably be the biggest thing, is when that nudge comes, just close your eyes and say, you know, I mean, that's what faith is. You know, a lot of people like try to define what their faith is, what their purpose is. And really that's what it is. It's just saying yes and taking that next step and saying, I don't know where we're going, and this feels crazy, but let's take that next step, you know? And then I've been listening to a little bit of like Ed Milet. I saw him speak about a week ago, but he talks about one more day. And that really struck a chord with me, because, you know, laying there in bed, it's like I was looking, and, you know, the doctor wouldn't even give me permission to put any weight, you know, for whatever it was, 2-3 months. And it's like 3 months, like I got to lay in a bed for 3 months, you know, it's just so far away. But when you look at everything, you know, whatever it is in the moment, I could never picture my life looking like this today while I was laying in that bed, but I knew I could get to tomorrow. And then the next day I knew I could get to the next day. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, now a month is gone, 2 months is gone. For me, I was living at my dad's house and my stepmom for recovery. Because, you know, the farm wasn't quite ready. We bought it dilapidated. People came out and fixed it up. And like, that was my dream. So that was like my first goal. was like, I just got to get through one more day so we can get to the farm. Like, I just want to live at the farm. So then like when we got out here, it was like, all right, that step was made, just one more day, and then it was surgeries, follow-up surgeries and revisions and stuff. So, but just one more day, because looking beyond that, 2 years down the road, two things, it seems too far and it seems impossible. And honestly, you underestimate what's possible in 2 years. I would have never thought my life would look like it does today in 2 years, when I was laying in that bed, and it looks way greater than it did. So I'm just super grateful that I had the people around me to help me get through. And I just woke up, and one more day, took another step. Well, not technically took another step, took another figurative step laying in bed, and got one more day knocked out of the way and one more day towards progress,
Mike Neubauer, thank you for sharing this story. If people want to find out more about you, about your company, where can they go to learn more about Mike Neubauer?
Yeah, so I'm Mike Neubauer at wherever people go. Instagram, a little bit. I'm on Instagram, mostly Facebook. But you'll find me. All my stuff's public. I don't really keep things private. So anything I share there. And then if you check out our company is Grand Vision Capital Group. So that's grandvision.co. So that's a company that we just launched. We've been working on it for about 8 months, but it just launched actually a couple of days ago. So that's where I'm at.
Because he's still got big plans for you. And Mike Neubauer, thanks for coming on the Iron Deep podcast. If you guys want to find out more about Grand Vision, Mike Neubauer, it's on Facebook and Instagram. Again, we thank you, Mike Neubauer, for hanging with us, and we'll see you guys next time on the Iron Deep podcast.